All right. Good day, everyone. Time for another video for another class. And as you can see, I've got SA3 up because by the time you are watching it, this video, it has been officially assigned. The assignment sheet is up or will be up on D2L with all the particulars, due dates, requirements. All of that stuff will be on there. This one is going to have the same length requirements, MLA format, 3 to 5 pages, 3 full pages, and this is going to be a problem solution. Now, before we get into that, I need to make a very, very important announcement, and that is revisions for SA2 revisions. The first draft was already due and already returned to those who turned it in. The issue here is that revisions are due by Friday, and for way too many people in all three classes, I don't even have draft one yet. So if you want to get any kind of credit for SA2, I need something by Friday, and whatever you give me is going to be your final draft. So I just want to reiterate and make that very clear because I am missing quite a few of them at this point. For a very small number of people, I'm missing SA1 and 2, and since the withdrawal date has already passed, if you haven't turned in SA1 or 2 at this point, you cannot pass the class. It is mathematically impossible. So you already know what your final grade is if you have not turned in SA1 or 2 yet. It's not going to be a passing grade. Um, I have contacted everyone who has not turned something in with their GGC email specifically. I did not send out a mass email or a mass warning. So if you're missing something, you have an email from me. Whether you've checked it or not, I can't do that part for you too. So for those who needed to hear this, I hope you're watching. And those who don't need to hear it, I'm sorry that I had to make this announcement. So let's get back to SA3, problem solution. Again, as I said in the last class video, it's simple, but it's not easy. You state a problem, you define the problem, you explain why it's a problem. Now, believe it or not, that's a necessary step. What you want to do is in your introduction in this essay, you want to give some background. You don't just want to say this is a problem and here's what we're going to do about it. It's not that's not going to work. That rarely works in real life. So we want to in the intro we want to establish the problem. That's like the first thing that we want to get right on the plate. Boom, right down there. That's the appetizer, if you will. So give some background, say blank, blank, blank has been a problem since blah, 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 and it's not getting any better because of, you give some, whatever. You want to establish to your readers that it is a problem, and by doing that and defining it, the problem, explaining why it's a problem in the intro, that's the first most important, crucial step because you want the audience to be sympathetic. You want the audience to, or empathetic, might be a problem they themselves are going through, and say, hey, somebody's going to offer something that can help. You want the audience to be on your side. You want to win them over. You don't want to be antagonistic or anything, we don't want to go that route. You want to try to gain support in the intro. And the way you do that is by not just saying XYZ is a problem, you say XYZ is a problem because this is what it does. Now, not in all cases, because you guys know what I think about absolutes. But in many cases, for problems, before we can solve a problem, we have to know what the cause is. It's very difficult to solve a problem without knowing what the cause is. Now, problems can be solved without knowing the cause. It's not impossible, but in the overwhelming majority of cases, in order to solve a problem, we first have to know what's causing it. Because if we don't know where it's coming from, I mean, just think about that logically. It's kind of hard to stop something if you don't know where it's coming from, or reduce it, or improve. If it's something that's broken, how do we fix it? Well, if we don't know what part's not working, how are we going to fix it? So think about this kind of logically. And for those of you who are more hands-on type people, um, you can think of it more. You can think of it more mechanically. For those of you who are more on the kind of I don't really want to say creative, because mechanical stuff can be extremely creative, but for those who think more in the abstract, your challenge is going to be able to make these abstract concepts tangible for a wide audience, okay? So you can approach from either a very concrete, hands-on kind of, if you turn this here and then you replace this here, and a very structured mechanical solution that can work, but also an abstract, more philosophical solution could work as well. It's going to be kind of more tailored to your own personal learning preferences and your own personal teaching, because you are in this problem solution, y'all are basically taking on the role of a teacher. You're explaining what the problem is, and then you're teaching us, the readers, the audience, how to solve it. So there are going to be parameters, and I used that example in the last video of world hunger. You're not going to solve world hunger in a 3 to 5 page essay. If you could do that, you would be I don't know, you would be something that does not exist and has never existed on planet Earth. You would be a human being that has never, the likes of which has never been seen. So the problem has to be manageable within the limits of the essay. So you've got roughly 3 to 5 pages to tackle some issue, explain why it's an issue, and then explain how we're going to fix it. And like I said last time, solving it does not mean 100% it's gone, it no longer exists. It could be reducing something. I think that, last time I talked about it could be something that you personally struggle with. It could be studying for tests or getting your essays done, procrastinating. If you can go from studying or doing schoolwork 0 minutes a week to 2 hours a week, it's not outstanding. That's not going to blow any. Whoa, wow, you're the ultimate student. That's not going to blow anybody away, but it's a heck of a lot better than 0. So you've improved your study habits by going from 0 seconds to 2.5 hours. You've drastically improved your study habits. So that wouldn't solve the problem completely, but it would definitely be a lot better. It would improve it. So, and if it's something that there's too much of, like, I don't know, like crime, we would want, and we don't want more of it, we want to reduce it. So in that case, the problem would be a reduction. Whereas study habits, where we don't have any and we don't do it, more would be better. In the crime case, most people would agree that less would be better. Okay, so that's just two kind of polar opposite examples there. So that's what you want to be doing. But the problem has to be manageable. In other words, it can't be some gigantic issue that's been affecting the entire human race for thousands of years. You're not going to do anything, really. You're not going to solve that problem in a little English 1101 3, 4, 5 page essay. It's just simply not going to happen. So that's the problem part of it, okay? It has to be manageable within the limits of the essay. Now, when we get to the solution portion, something that in the real world, and a lot of laws and statutes and things like that are passed with good intentions, but you know the old saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. end up causing more problems than what they were supposed to fix. You know, and I'm not going to go that route and give any specific examples of laws that. Well, I can. A real example of a solution that, in my opinion, caused far more problems than it solved was back in the early part of the 20th century, when we were in the 1900s. You know, when prohibition in the early 1900s, when the United States made possession, production, or consumption of alcohol illegal across the board for the whole United States. A lot of people were saying, "Yay, good, good, the devil's juice is gone," and all that junk. Well, when as soon as prohibition started, I mean, literally, like the day that it went into effect, a whole new version, a whole new style, a whole new type of crime jumped right out into the mainstream and caused a whole lot of destruction and a whole lot of death. And I'm talking about bootleggers. I'm talking about like Al Capone, people like that. All of that stuff. That was a direct result. None of that stuff would have speakeasies, you know, bathtub gin that was making people go blind. So none of those problems would have existed without prohibition. That's not my opinion. I don't give one way or another about prohibition. I'm saying that solution to a perceived problem caused those bigger problems. It caused all Chicago, you know, all the gang wars, New York, Chicago, all of that was a direct result of prohibition. It wasn't like a little side effect. It was a direct result, because the only thing that caused these crime syndicates at that time period to grow as large and powerful and as destructive and, you know, Murder Inc., none of that would have existed without prohibition. So that is a direct result where a solution to a perceived problem ended up causing, in many people's opinions, including mine, much bigger problems than existed before. Okay, so you have to take that into consideration when you get into your solution phase. Is my solution, even if it solves this problem or improves this situation, am I going to are worse things going to happen as a result? And that's hard to predict. You know, but you can realistically assess possible drawbacks, which you should be doing in these essays. You should say, here's what the problem is. Here are my proposed solutions. There's usually going to be more than one solution. You can offer alternatives. You know, one body paragraph could be, well, the first thing we could do is this and this and this. Now, if that's a little bit too much, maybe you could offer alternatives. So it doesn't have to be one my way or the highway, one thing only. You can actually offer multiple solutions to the same problem. And that way, you know, that's even a more, in my opinion, that's a much more diplomatic approach, because you're giving your audience different angles to look at it. And it makes you, as the writer, it makes you, the person making this proposal, it makes you look like you are more diplomatic, like you're more open-minded. If it's just one way and one way only, with no budging in any direction whatsoever, even if it's a great solution, a lot of people are going to be turned off by that, because you're telling them that it's my way and the only way. It's the be all, it's the end all. I will not hear anybody else's opinion on this. If you offer alternatives, you're going to take a little bit of that out of the equation. So a more diplomatic approach might be what you want to do. And again, this is all entirely up to y'all. You can approach this in whatever way you think is going to be most effective. That's what you have to, as the writer, as the author, you have to think this is your argument. You are arguing that A, B, or C, X, Y, Z, whatever, is a problem. That's your argument. And then you say, now that I've got you on my side and that you agree with me that this is a problem, here's what we need to do to fix it. You're arguing that your solutions are the best. So this is 100% an argumentative essay. And you're going to use, you can use elements of the first two essays in this. You can use compare and contrast. You can use evaluation. You have to. I mean, you should be. You can use personal experience. This is the last essay out of the semester that you are allowed to use first person. Don't use second person. I'm going to say that over and over again. Do not use second person. Do not write in the second person. Do not say, you are going to be amazed at my solutions. Don't use you. Okay? Just don't do it. Stay away from it. But for the fourth and final essay, first person is gone. So this is your last chance to write in the first person. You don't have to. You can write first or third. That's up to you. And I'm going to go over in the next video, I'm going to go over how to convert first person to third person and what third person actually is. So you do have a second option for this problem solution essay. Now the first right here, up top, right up here, this is just the basics that any type of essay you do is going to have. You have to establish that it's a problem, and then you're going to offer solutions that are manageable, realistic, and are not going to create additional larger problems. Okay, that's what I call the straightforward problem solution essay. And the problem has to work, okay? For your second option, you're going to have the choice of doing what's called a satire. Now with this one, I'm giving you a huge caveat. This is a huge warning. Okay, I'm going to go over what satire is, but if you have no clue what satire is at this point, I would say stay away from it. Before I say what, if you can read this on the screen, you can read this OE Oxford English Dictionary definition of it, but before I discuss what a satire is, I'm going to discuss what it isn't, because this is one of the most misunderstood words in modern English. Satire is not parody. Okay, a lot of people think that satire is just making fun of something. People think that shows like, skit shows like SNL, Saturday Night Live, or something like that, where they, for the most part, they're just making fun of stuff. Their goal is to get laughs. Now they can have, some politically charged stuff and issues and stuff, which they do, but for the most part, those are just parodies. Like when somebody's impersonating somebody else, like when somebody like when Dave Chappelle does Rick James. That's not a satire. He's doing a parody of Rick James. Now Chappelle does some satire. I'm not gonna don't get that twisted. He does, but when he's doing the Rick James stuff, that's just him. That's just him being hilarious, or in my opinion, that's just him being funny. His goal is to get people to laugh. Okay, so parody, the end result, the goal, the desired outcome is laughter. Okay, in satire, the desired outcome is awareness and possibly change. Okay, those are the goals of satire. Best case scenario is if through satire, if the person or persons who are writing, performing, whatever the satire, if they can bring about change on what it is they're satirizing, that's the best possible outcome. However, simply bringing awareness to what is being satirized is a good outcome. So that's all pretty abstract, what I just explained to you. So to give you a real example, I'm going to show you an excerpt from A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift. Now, many of you have probably already heard of this, and you may have studied it in school already somewhere at some point. but I have no idea, and I know for sure that some of you have never heard of this. So this is one of the most recognized satires in English literature, and I would say, in the just as a form, as an example of satire, period. A Modest Proposal is one of the most famous examples. Now, I will give you some background about the essay, and it is an essay. It's an essay that Jonathan Swift wrote under an assumed name. He didn't even use his real name when he wrote it. Later on, it came out that yes, this was Jonathan Swift that wrote it. But initially, when it was first published in some of the magazines and newspapers in Great Britain in 1729, he didn't put his real name on it because it was dangerous for him to do so. Now, I'm going to bring up a little clip excerpt from it. Now, it doesn't matter if you guys can see this on the screen or not. I'm just here so that I can have it up here so that I can read it and give you some examples. Okay, so to give you some background and a little setup for those of you who are not familiar. Okay, Swift wrote this and published it in 1729. Jonathan Swift lived in Ireland. He was English by birth, but he lived in Ireland. Now, at this time period in Ireland, not in Great Britain, in Ireland exclusively, there was a famine. And what I mean by a famine is that poor people were starving. And I don't mean they were hungry. I don't mean, oh man, I could eat a horse. If there was a horse to eat, it already got eaten. Okay, the people were, I mean starving in a literal sense. They were dying of malnourishment. Poor people were. In disturbingly large numbers. They did not have food. There was not enough to go around. And the British government's official stance on this famine, now you know a real famine is usually caused by Mother Nature. It's usually caused by drought. That's what causes famine. That's what causes these things to happen. When they're man-made, it's a little bit different. So the British government's official stance on it is that there was a potato famine, which is what the poor people in Ireland ate. That was their primary and pretty much, for the most part, their only food source were potatoes. So during this harvest season, or the last couple, this was going on more than just one season, it had been going on for quite some time, and it finally reached the point to where people were literally starving to death. So the British government, and this was still when Britain was a true monarchy at this point. There was a parliament, but it was nowhere near, it was nothing like it is today. The king or queen still had humongous amounts of power. Now the queen is just kind of like a figurehead, like something they put on a coin or a piece of money. What was happening is that the government's stance was that this was just a famine. It was as they would state it, an act of God. You know, it's a bad harvest. We can't do anything about that. That's just bad luck. Doggone it. Well, what was really happening is that all of these giant plantations, these farms, this farmland in Ireland, almost all of it was owned by English landlords, barons, basically. Barons, dukes, bishops, archbishops, you know, people like that were the landowners, and they were almost exclusively English, which meant they weren't even in the same country. Now, you didn't hop on a jet and fly to Ireland for the weekend back in the 1700s. Most of these landowners had never even set foot on the land that they owned up there, but they had people taking care of it. And basically, what was happening to the majority of the harvest is that it was being grown and harvested in Ireland, and then it was being taken out of Ireland and shipped all over the place, taken back to England, shipped overseas, shipped all over the place, because the landowners in England could make a lot more money off of it. The poor people in Ireland couldn't afford to buy the stuff, so why would they sell it there? So this was a man-made problem. This problem was clearly man-made. There was no famine. There were plenty of potatoes. They just weren't staying there. Swift, as an Englishman living in Ireland, was witnessing this firsthand. Everybody down in England was reading what the official newspapers and stuff were telling them, and they weren't going to say what was really going on. They'd say, "Oh, this drought, famine continues, and oh, the poor people up there don't have any food." Well, they don't have any food because it was being taken away from them. Swift knew this, and he saw this. So, under an assumed name, he wrote a modest proposal and had it published and distributed all around Great Britain. And when a lot of the people in the public who could make a difference, people who actually had power, read this, they were horrified. Not because of what was really going on, because of his satire. Now, his satire used ridicule. He used these, and ridicule is where you exaggerate, you use hyperbole, you completely blow things out of proportion. You get to the root word, you get ridiculous. You just make up these far-fetched things that are preposterous, but they also have shock value. And that's where a satire works, is you shock people into paying attention to a real problem by exaggerating or proposing, in this case, ridiculous, horrific, shocking solutions. Now that you know what's going on, that these people are starving in Ireland because their food source is being taken away from them and sold elsewhere, what Swift proposed in a modest proposal is that, okay, we've got these people starving in Ireland, right? Yeah, they're hungry. Well, they don't have any potatoes to eat, but what can poor people do? Well, they can have sex and they can have babies. There you go. They have a renewable food source. Instead of growing potatoes, they can just keep having babies, and then when the babies reach a certain age, they'll reach a certain weight, and then they can be basically butchered and made into food. And you can cook them. And he offers recipes and nice dishes. And not only that, you don't want to waste anything, so you can use the skin to make nice little gloves for the ladies and nice little, pieces of clothing, brooches, things, whatever. Bones can make little brooches. So he goes all out on this. And it is utterly shocking and terrifying, which he knew. He knew it was going to shock the people, the people who could actually do something. It would shock the aristocrats, the people who had the power, who had the money, who had the land, because they took this seriously. And in the end, it actually did end up causing some change. There were some laws passed that said only X amount of product can be taken from Ireland and sold elsewhere, a certain percentage of it, which before didn't exist. They could have taken 100% of it, but then they wouldn't have any workers because they'd all be dead. But it did actually bring about change. There were reforms in food distribution. And in other words, you can only export X amount of the food that's supposed to be feeding your people on your land. The rest of it has to stay there and be available to those people who harvest it, the people doing the work. So it brought about real change. Now, if you guys pay attention here, you can see he's super detailed. This person narrating it says, I've reckoned upon a medium that a child just born will weigh 12 pounds, and in a solar year, if totally nursed, increaseth to 28 pounds. So he's saying that after a year, this child is going to be 28 pounds. Well, there you go. You've got a nice, basically, think about a 28-pound turkey. That's a lot of food. And that's what he's doing here. He's comparing these children to livestock and saying, look, a 28-pound kid could feed a family of 4 for this many days. He offers up how to nurse them. He's saying that this is the best way to nurse them. This is the best, because you've got to feed them. You've got to plump them up to get them ready to cook and eat. he goes into excruciating detail, and you guys, this is public domain. You guys can read it. You can just Google A Modest Proposal, Jonathan Swift, Project Gutenberg's got it in its original text with your no alterations or anything. It's not that long, and it's a perfect example, you know. And he talks about, he says, well, hey, they do this over in these countries. He even mentions America. And this is before, this is when America was, when the U.S. was still a British colony. This is in 1729, folks. And he says, you know, a friend of mine, an American, said that that the flesh of children tastes delicious with a little salt and some carrots. And, you know, America was this wild, savage place back then. And, you know, he's like, and it was, you know, it was a thing, it was a mystical place. It was like this weird other world. And they're like, well, if they're doing it over there, and there's where all these riches and all this stuff is, and everybody's got plenty over there, maybe we should do it here. He's playing with his audience, and he's shocking them into actually recognizing the real problem. Because what happened after he proposed this absolutely ridiculously horrifying solution is a lot of people who could actually do something about the real problem were saying, we can't have, they took it seriously. They're saying, we can't have these poor peasants in Ireland eating their children. That's ungodly. That's horrible. It's whatever. It terrified people. And, you know, whether this was directly responsible or not, it's undeniable that it did have an influence on getting reform, real true reform, passed that controlled the amount of crops, produce, that could be taken from one jurisdiction to another. You know, tariffs. They put tariffs on it to make it economically unfeasible to do it. Whereas before there was nothing, there was no stopping them. They had carte blanche. They could do whatever they wanted, and they were making money hand over fist by taking these potatoes out of Ireland and taking them down into England and to other places, and just selling them at massive, huge profits. But once people realized that people were literally starving, and this helped kind of point it out, and some people, you know, a lot of people actually did think that we don't need human beings eating babies in order to survive. And it actually did affect real change. So that's the bottom line. So satire is not just making fun of something. You're not just being ha ha ha, look at me, or trying to shock people. There has to be a real issue. And this is probably even the more important part. Your absolutely ridiculous solution would actually have to work. You can't just invent something. You know, like let's say if you were saying this would be a no-go, this would not work. If you were going to do a satire and say, I'm going to solve world hunger, we're going to build a spaceship and fly to a country that has fly to a planet that has enough food for everybody on Earth, and then we're just going to teleport it back to Earth and everybody will have food. Ha ha ha, solve that. No, this isn't, you can't just go nuts. It has to be something that you can explain how it's going to work, and it would actually have to work. Now, with this modest proposal, as horrifying as this is, would it actually work to keep people from starving? Yes, it would. It actually would. Now, the way that it would go about preventing people starving is horrifying. It's absolutely atrocious. But would it actually work? Yes, it would. Now, that was not his intention. His intention was for no one to actually entertain doing this. His intention was to shock people into realizing that there is an issue that can be solved without resorting to this. So that's kind of what you would be doing with the satire. You still have to take everything else into account, though. You have to go into detail about how this would be accomplished and what would be the drawbacks. So it's going to be treated structurally just like what I call a straightforward one. So you have to take everything into account. And again, this is an option, but if you do take this option, it's not a free-for-all. You're not just getting to go crazy and just write some stupidly ridiculous stuff. It has to have structure, it has to actually work, and it has to be very well established and explained. As with a straightforward problem solution, you have to explain the problem, establish the problem, convince us readers that it's a problem, and then your solutions have to be feasible, realistic, and they have to work. Okay? So I'll give you a real quick example before I sign off on something that would just be not gonna, that would just, I'd give it right back to you with do this over. How are we going to solve this the housing problem in wherever? I'm not going to name a specific place because I don't want to, but let's say there's place X has a housing problem. There's a lot of homeless people in X place and they don't have anywhere to live. Okay, I figured out how to solve the homeless problem in X place. Well, awesome. You're going to solve the homeless problem. What are you going to do? I'm going to build everybody a house. Problem solved. No, that's ludicrous. That's ridiculous in a bad way, and that would not work because you'd have to explain how you're going to get the money, the materials, the labor, the permits, the land. You'd have to explain all of that and how you're going to just do it for free. Okay, so take this, even if you choose the satire. In fact, I would say, especially if you choose the satire option, take this essay very seriously. Consider every angle that you possibly can. What is this problem? Why is it a problem? What's causing it? What can we do to help fix it? And what are the possible drawbacks of my solutions? Or are my solutions going to create bigger problems? Take all of that into consideration. This is a real thinking essay right here. You have to really come at this one at all different angles. So start thinking about what you want to do, check out the assignment sheet, and then I will go into even more detail and examples in the next video. So good day, and I'll see you next time.